Alright guys, in today's video what I'm going to be taking you through is a front brake job on a 2000 Toyota Camry and doing it all with factory OEM parts. So one of the first things you want to do when doing a job like this before you get started is just inspect for what else might be damaged and looking at everything now that you got the tire off and the wheel off. So one of the couple of things we notice right off the bat, we can see this one's going to need a new dust cover, right? Because that one's all cracked and broken. And then just right at the corner of our eye, we can see that the bushing on the lower control arm back here, if we zoom in, I'm going to recommend the owner think about that being replaced too, because you can see where this is all beginning to fray and disintegrate. There's a couple other things that we can take a look at on the other side. Let me shift this over and we'll move the camera over on this side and I'll show you a couple other things we can see just on the initial inspection. Alright, if we zoom in here, another thing I'll show this owner is you can see that the boot on the ball joint here, on the lower ball joint, it has split, right? So it's letting water and crap get into the ball joint. So the ball joints also need to be replaced. So that's why you would do an inspection like this. You know, we can take a look at the CV axle boot, and if we zoom in there, it's not leaking yet, but you can see where it's beginning to fray inside here. So that's just something to watch. But whenever you do a brake job like this, there's a lot of stuff you can get an eye, take into account and eyeball before you get started on the basic maintenance, just to see if there's anything else that doesn't normally get your attention that might need to be looked at in the future or looked at afterwards. All right, guys, let's take a look at the driver's side now. Same kind of inspection we want to do. Right off the bat, we can take a look at the bleeder cap, and we can see this one also. If we zoom in, it's cracking. It's going to need to be replaced also. And if we take a look over here in the corner on our lower control arm, since the passenger side one was out, let's take a look at the one on the driver's side here. He's actually okay. So, only the passenger side one is cracked really bad. You can see, if you zoom in there, you can see, there's some real fine deterioration occurring right there, but nothing cracked yet and it's still functional. Let's move the wheel and take a look at the ball joint on this side. Alright guys, we're taking a look at the ball joint here on this driver's side. If we zoom in, same problem as we saw on the passenger side. Let's try not to push any of this crud in here. But if we lift up on this, we can see the boot's split. That means as it bounces up and down, it's letting water and crud get in here to the ball joint. So it needs ball joints on both sides. But that's part of the inspection you should do. See what else is wrong while you got this out of the way. All right, let's take a look at what the service manual dictates for this particular vehicle. We're looking at the 2000 Toyota Camry Repair Manual, Volume 2. And we're going to flip it open to the brake section that talks about the pads. There's two things I'm going to point out here. The way this is done is broken out by what type of engine you've got, either a 2.2 liter 4-cylinder 5S-FE engine or the 1MZ-FE, which is the 6-cylinder engine. What you see the factory configuration is there's the two pads and there's a couple of springs that hold them against the rotor, and then there's two vented anti-squeal shims and then two solid anti-squeal shims. So that whole setup is what Toyota would use. A lot of the aftermarket deals omit these outer shims. And then on the torque plate, the Japanese call it a torque plate, but you'll probably often hear me refer to it as a caliper bracket. You have these pad support plates. And you need to take note of the drawings because on these Toyota ones for these years, they're different. There's a pair like this, and there's a pair like this that you'll see in a moment that have a little tab sticking out of them, just like the drawing shows. I know it's not super detailed, but it is accurate. When you look at the 6-cylinder one, those pad support plates are different. There's instead of 4, there's only 2. And then on the actual pads, instead of the wear indicator being built into the pad, it's a separate piece that gets put on. But otherwise, they look very similar. This video, though, is going to be focused on what the 5S-FE 2.2 liter is like. So that's one difference, is the engines. The other difference is the wheel sizes. There's different parts, even for this, on whether you have a 14-inch wheel or a 15-inch wheel. In this video, we're going to be covering the 14-inch wheel, but the procedure is very much the same, just different part numbers. I'll give the part numbers for both in the description. That means that these pads and these shims are different for the 15 and the 14-inch wheels, and these pad supports are different between the 15 and the 14-inch wheels. All right, so there's that. Whenever you see in this manual a notation like this, they're talking about the torque value. that's involved. The first number is going to be in Newton meters. The last number is going to be in foot pounds. In this case, they're talking about the bolts that retain the caliper to the caliper bracket or torque plate. So those are 25 foot-pounds when we get around to it. All right, the next thing that's worth highlighting here is they go through how they recommend you do this procedure. I'm not going to read this whole thing off, but you can kind of lift through it. We're actually going to go through and show this, and they make notations about differences between the two engines. And again, we're going to be focused on the 5S-FE. The one thing I'd highlight is the anti-squeal springs and the support plates, they can be reused. You got to check and make sure that they aren't shot, they have rebound to them, they're not bent, and they're not cracked, and they're not overly worn, and that you got to get the rust off. And if they're pitted, you got to toss them. But other than that, you can reuse those parts. They talk about checking the disc or rotor thickness and run out. Typically on these OEMs for this vehicle, they're going to start at 28 millimeters. You can go down to 26 millimeters, and then you're going to have to toss them. We're going to be replacing them anyway because we're going to be putting factory OEM parts on and getting rid of this aftermarket stuff. And then they talk about when replacing the pads. They make sure to tell you that the anti-squeal shims and wear indicator plates must be replaced together. So you can't replace these separately. You can't come in and replace the pads without also replacing the shims. There's a little bit more information up here that continues on these instructions, but again, I'm going to show you all of this. And then there's a little bit of instructions that talk about installing the caliper. And again, there's that 25 foot-pound. You'll find that the bolts that hold this are 14 millimeter. The torque they're talking about here has to do with the brake hose. You shouldn't be messing with that, but if you do, there it is. And then another torque you need to know when you get all done is for the front wheels, 76 foot-pounds on those 21 millimeter lug nuts. If we take a look over on the next drawing on the next page, this is worth highlighting because there's some additional torque values besides the one we just talked about. These 17 millimeter bolts that hold on the caliper bracket, they go to 79 foot-pounds. So that's useful to know there. And then when you take a step back here, they're also showing you some breakdown on these parts. And what's useful to know here is these pins, these arrows indicate lubrication points. So the pin itself, and then in this particular top pin, there's a grommet that gets lubricated, and then there's this rubber dust boot, gets lubrication inside. Then they show you the one on the bottom, same thing. There's a picture of the grommet, I guess it's a bushing, either way, and then the lubrication that goes in there as well. Now they also talk to you about that the type of lubricant you use is a lithium soap-based glycol grease. I'm going to show you the part number for that in a moment. And then in other cases where they have this kind of open arrow, it's disc brake grease, or sometimes it'll be an actual shim grease. I'll show you that part number as well. And they're showing you that on the vented portion of the shim. So the vented shim, which is typically black in color versus the silver outer ones, that also gets this grease, a different kind of grease applied. And then just for a glance, here's the 6-cylinder engine. Very similar torque values and layout, just different part numbers and different size parts. The last thing I want to show you here is a little bit of stuff from some technical service bulletins to add to that. So this part number here, 08887-8609, this is the disc brake caliper grease that they were talking about on that previous page. And what we're interested in here is where that goes. So that goes on either side of these pad support plates before you mount them to the bracket. And then they also talk about applying that on the inside tongue of the caliper itself. So we'll do that as well. And then they also talk about it on the pads themselves, both edges and the top. Both edges and the top. So those all get that particular kind of grease. This other bulletin from a few years later has some more clarification on the lubrication. So we'll skip some of this stuff to highlight that same lithium soap-based grease goes around the rubber boot of the caliper. That's part number 08887-01206. And I'll show you these parts as we go do the work. And then here, that same part number all along the length of the pin and the grommet. And then that's part that they mentioned before, that lubricant that's a shim grease. Depending on the type of shim, it goes only in the places indicated in red. You don't put it everywhere. Now this grease is going to come with the Toyota pad kit. But if it doesn't, I'll show you the part number for that as we get going as well. It's available separately if for some reason you lost it or you're reusing the shims and you don't have any more. Right, so that's the layout for that. It's basically in 2 places, on the 3 and the 4 hole and the 1 hole, and then in 1 place on the 2 and the 6 hole, all these different kind of brakes. And I think that is the last thing I wanted to show you guys. Yep, that's it. All right, let's get started. All right, guys, let's go ahead and start with the driver's side. Let's take off our 2 14s. Now sometimes you have to put a box end wrench on here and hold this because it can spin. But this time it did not. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab the shoes, because these springs are going to want to do what they just did, right? They're going to want to jump out. So we're just going to let them go slowly. And then we're going to bungee this guy up and out of the way. Take these springs off. And now we can take these 2 17s off. When you take this one off, hold on to it. You hold on to it, otherwise it might fall. And then you can also take the rotor off at this time. Okay, now we've got everything disassembled. So let's get some of these things out of our way, and we'll go inspect what we've got. All right, guys, just comparing what we took off. Right, so this came off like this. So this is outboard side, inboard side. You can also use the witness marks for the shoes to tell which way they were. The round one is going to be where the piston was hitting it, and then the prong side is going to be on this side. So if we put it back in, get in there. All right. These little springs were sitting like this into these little holes before we took it apart. And when we look at what we saw in the service manual, these aftermarket pads don't have the 2 shim plates on the outside, but otherwise they've got all the other pieces. They've got the springs and they've got the pads. And if we take all this back off and we take a look at the clip-on pads inside here, you want to take note of what you got here, though you don't always want to copy off the previous person because they might not have got it right either, and they didn't, right? So this is not really how this should look. There should be a pin with a longer tab down here on the bottom. These ones on the short side are right, though. Now we'll end up replacing this. We're going to have to clean up all the rust off of this bracket, and we're going to need to lube it up like we saw before we replace it. Now here's an example where you can see on these and compare, you know, whether they're still good, right? And we can see just holding the upper arch of these springs, we can see there's a difference. So one of them stretched out. So if we didn't have that problem, we could clean off the rust and reuse them. But since we do have one that's stretched out, it's time to discard it and replace it. All right, so let's go ahead and get all of these out of here. And then we're going to go wire wheel off the inside of this. We're going to need to get all this corrosion that you see off of here. We're going to do that on both sides. And then the other thing that we're going to do to finish prepping this guy That one's in there really good. I don't know what I did with my little prizing tool. There he is. Get that guy off. The other thing we're going to want to do is replace these boots. Now, if they're not damaged or anything, you can reuse them. These pins should turn freely, and these don't. I don't think they're stuck, though. I think they're just dried up grease. Give it a pull. We finally got it to let go. There's the bushing in there. So it's just dried up grease on this one. Probably going to be the same deal with this one. Nope, this one moves pretty good. But still dried up grease. So if there's no corrosion in here and they haven't rusted on, you can reuse them. I'm going to give you the part numbers for replacing them anyway. You can also, if it's just a problem with this bushing, you can also replace just the bushing. I'll give you the part number for that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and replace these boot assemblies. What we have to do is we have to get a punch and a hammer, and we have to hammer it off. You see there's a little bit of a ridge that you can grab onto. You can hammer this guy off, and I'll show you how to do that and how to install the new ones. And then to replace it, we're going to use a 47775 06030. That's going to give us a couple more of these press-in dust boots. And as far as these pins go, it's a 47715 06020 for this top one. This will be the one that goes in where you have the number on the bracket. And then it's going to be a 47715 0630. This is the one that'll go in that's stamped with the directional side. Right, this one's a left for the driver's side. The one on the passenger side will be stamped with an R, so you can't mess it up. The one without the bushing goes on the directional stamping, and the one with the bushing goes on the number stamping. What else can I show you guys here? That's probably it for now. We need to get going on some of this stuff. The pads that we're going to be using is from Toyota's MVP line. These are like a lower cost line, 04465-AZ101. And again, this is only for the 14-inch size wheels and brakes. The 15-inch ones are different. And then we're going to be using this shim kit, 04945-33030. And again, this is only for the 14-inch wheels. But if we take a 14-inch Toyota pad like this, and then we take one of our, separate them out here, we'll take one of the vented shims, there's cutouts on a Toyota pad to mount these, right? So they just snap on just like that. Then we'll put some of that grease here and here, like the service manual indicated, and then we'll put one of these plates to hold it on, right? And we'll do that to both pads. And that's how that setup works, to do it the factory OEM way. So the grease will be in between these two. All right, so let's go ahead and get this caliper all cleaned up. We're going to want to sand off the corrosion on this flange of the wheel bearing here as well. We'll have a special tool that'll go in here and get it off around these studs so that we'll be ready to mount the new rotor. And then I'll give you the part number for the disc or the rotor. You know, Japanese call it a disc. I'm more going to call it the American term of a rotor. And we'll get that mounted. And again, it's a different rotor part number for the 14 and the 15-inch wheels as well. So remember, like we saw in the service manual, parts in Toyotas for these years are dictated by what kind of engine do you have, 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder, what size wheels do you have, 14 or 15, and where was the vehicle manufactured? NAP, North America production, or JAP, Japanese production. There are actually part differences between the factories as well. When we rebuild this, we're also going to need some parts that are contained in what's called a fitting kit. So these springs that we talked about, you can reuse them if they're not deformed or overly extended. We don't know the pedigree on these, so we're replacing them with OEM, and they come with the fitting kit anyway, and we need to replace other parts that this comes with. So these springs, you're going to need 4, 2 on each side. And then the pad supports are like this. These go into the caliper bracket, or the torque plate, the way Toyota calls it, to retain the ear of the pad. And you're going to have two that look like this on the 14-inch wheels, two that look like this on each side, and two that look like this on each side. And the ones that have this little prong here are the inboard ones. So this is going to be pad positions 1 and 3, the odd numbered positions, and this will be the even numbered positions 2 and 4. And so these are for the 14-inch wheels. So when you buy a pad kit, it'll be part number 04947 06051. This is the 14-inch kit. You can see in here we've got new versions of all of these. There's 8 of them, 4 for each side, and then 4 new springs. And you can't mix these up with the 15-inch. The 15-inch I happen to have here to show you the number. This is the 15-inch wheel, and again the 2.2 liter 04947 08030. This is for the 15-inch, and the reason I say you can't mix them up, you can see, I should take a couple of these. These are visibly different. So the inboard ones look very similar to the 14-inch, but they're bigger. So these won't fit in a 14-inch torque plate, and these won't fit in a 15-inch torque plate. 14-inch, 15-inch. But the outboard ones are noticeably different, right? It's like this. This is a 15-inch, this is a 14-inch. Anyway, so hopefully that helps you pick those out. I'll put all these part numbers in the description, and I'll show you the orientation of how these go in, at least on the 14-inch, which is the vehicle we're working on here, which is a 2000 Toyota CE. All right, guys, we've got this wheel bearing flange all done except for this. I'll show you this last piece and the technique I use for getting these this cosmetic surface corrosion off on this. Then over here on the caliper bracket, right, we've got our 2 pad mounting surfaces. These are our support pads that we were talking about earlier. We got these all cleared off here. I went ahead and popped off the one dust boot here, and I left one of these to show you and one of these to show you. So for this type of stuff, it's really dusty. And so besides having your eye protection, you're going to need to have a dust mask too. So let me get geared up here. I'll show you the technique for cleaning this, for getting this out, and for finishing up that wheel bearing flange. Alright guys, that is all it takes to get these guys off and get them all cleaned up. So let me get cleaned up on our workspace and let's start reassembling everything. Alright guys, we also brake cleaned out the bores for these pins, so now everything's ready for reassembly. So let's start with these dust boots, our 47, 775, 060 30s. The way we're going to put these on is we're just going to take a 20 millimeter socket and we're going to very carefully push the rubber part of the boot in here. You don't want to punch a hole in it, right? And then we're going to be able to seat that in here, and then we're just going to use a brass hammer so that we don't damage our socket. And we're just going to tap these in. Just want to check it all the way around. Make sure it's fully seated. If it's not, go ahead and give it a repeat. Let's try to seat that little gap right there. Alright, happy with that. And we'll do the other one off camera. Alright guys, we went ahead and put our second boot in, and we're in the process of getting our caliper grease. That's our 08887 80609 grease that I showed you on the technical service bulletin and the service manual. And we're just coating up inside of this bracket where we're going to end up putting these support pads, right? So we want to get it kind of like that, top and bottom. And then we're going to come in here, and the way these are going to go, the one with the longer end, this is position 1, and position 3. So the odd ones get this little piece that sticks out, this little tongue, and then the one that doesn't have the tongue goes in position 2 and position 3. So the odd ones are short and the even ones are long. Right? So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the positions. You can buy these individually. I'll put those individual part numbers in the description as well. Right? So at this point, we want to go ahead and get our pins going. So we gave those part numbers earlier. 030 is going to go down here, and 020 is going to go up here. And the lubricant for that is going to be our 08887 01206. This is what they call rubber grease. It's like a pink color. And so on this, what we're going to do is we're going to take out this first pin. These new ones will come with the bushing already there. And then we just want to grease this shank of this pin up really good. And then just like the service manual indicated, we want to put a little bit in the actual boot. Now this is going to trap air. So we want to get that bushing to go into the bore without coming off. And when it slips like that, you're good. You kind of hear like the air come out. Sometimes you have to give this boot a little squeeze to let the air come out. That's the rest of the air coming out right there. Twist it on and verify correct operation. All right, so there's no air, and we got it well greased. Then we can clean up our excess. All right, let's do the same thing on this one. Take the other pin. This is the one that does not have the bushing. Just make sure this entire pin is coated. A little bit inside the boot to keep feeding it. We don't have to worry about the bushing coming off on this one, but we still have the problem with air. There, we got that out. Just trying to get our boot around this little ridge here. Didn't want to snap on as easily as the first one did. There we go. All right, so we're going to verify correct operation. Make sure we don't have any air in there. So the air is indicated by the bounce, right? So we don't want to have any air bouncing around in there. So we're going to want to continue to try and work this out to get rid of this bounce. Every time we do that, we get a little bit more air out. You can see it squirt out right there. It's just a little bit left. Sometimes it'll work its way out on its own. But you just got to burp it. There. It's probably a very tiny bit in, but I think the rest of it will naturally work its way out. So I'm happy with that. So this guy is ready to mount, and then what we're going to do up here on the flange for the rotor, we're just going to do a little bit of fluid film here just to cut down on the rust that's going to want to accumulate on this inside ridge. Mostly. We're not in a northern climate where we got to worry about these things bonding together, but just want to cut down on that problem overall. So we're going to end up putting this guy on first after we put the rotor back on. So let me show you the rotor that's correct for this 14-inch wheel. All right, guys, the disc for the 14-inch wheels is 43512-06010. I'll put the part number for the 15 in the description along with this one. The difference is this guy is smaller, obviously. I believe the diameter on this one is 255 millimeters, whereas the 15-inch one is going to be 275. All right, so they're not going to come out super pretty, and they don't need to, because the first time you use it, you're going to burn off anything corrosion-wise on there. But just in case there's any kind of a coating on here, we're going to go ahead and brake clean it off on the outside. I mean, that's brand new out of the box, and it still has something on it there. And then we'll go ahead and mount this guy up on here. Now we don't have to worry about any screws or anything like that on this particular model. And then we'll throw a lug nut on here just to make sure she doesn't accidentally fall off before we're ready. And then we'll just give her a wipe on the outside as well. Some of this is just the paint the factory sprays on this center section. Can kind of smear off with the brake clean. All right, now let's go ahead and get this bracket remounted with our 217s and torque it down. All right, this guy is just going to come up here. Just play hunt the bolt hole. Go. Find out where this one goes. Get him started. And then remember from our service manual, we'll torque these both down to 29 foot-pounds. Or excuse me, 79 foot-pounds. 79 foot-pounds. All right. So we'll get that torqued down, and then we'll be able to get our pads and stuff mounted, and we'll be able to show how those shims go in. All right. 79 there. 79 there. All right, let's get the pads on. Let's do our outboard pad. And let's do our inboard pad. Yeah, get in there. There we go. All right, now let's put our shim kit in. Okay, we're going to put this guy. We're not going to snap him in yet because we still got to put the lubricant. Let's just get our parts out here. We're going to need 2 of these, 1 for each side. Got to get them unstuck. And I'm going to need 1 more of the vented one. And there'll be enough to do the passenger side. These kits, like the service manual indicated, they should come with the special grease that you need to use. So we're going to use this little packet here from last time. I'm just going to squeeze some of this. It's like a dark, I want to say like it's a dark gray, maybe even a little greenish color. But this is a Toyota disc brake shim grease, is what it is. All right, so let's get the camera in a better orientation. That way you can see how both these go on and how the lubrication get applied. All right, guys, hopefully this is a good view for you. All right, we're going to start with the pad. So remember from the manual, or rather from the service bulletin, it suggested for these 2-hole type pads, backing plates, it gets 1 area in the middle, just like you saw me do. And then, whoops, I almost forgot. And then you're supposed to get it on each ear of the actual shim. Get this guy snapped in. And then again, we're going to get it on each ear. And then we're going to take the outer shim and get that in there. Get him snapped in. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing. Obviously, we can't get the camera on the other side, but we're going to do the exact same thing on the inboard pad. We're going to put some of the shim grease in the center. We're going to put shim grease on each ear. Put the vented one on first. Other sides, both ears, and then we're going to put the solid one on the outside. All right, guys, some of you may have noticed that I had this inboard pad flipped. I had the left hand on the right hand side flipped off. You're supposed to have this wear indicator facing the top of the caliper bracket, or the torque plate, as Toyota calls it. And I had this at the bottom. So I caught that about partway through. We were just about to be done, and I had to go over and take the other side and flip these back. So trying to show you the Toyota way of doing it, and the Toyota way of doing it is to have this on top. All right, time for our caliper now. Now, if you got a lot of surface rust, you might want to sand this off here. And then we definitely want to wipe the rubber boot off. The reason we're wiping it off is we're going to do what the service manual said, right? You know, it's actually the service bulletin, right? Wipe off the dust, brake dust and dirt from this boot, and then treat it with the rubber grease. And then we're going to need to compress it so that we can mount it on with the width of the new pads. So we're going to take our rubber grease, that's the pink stuff, the good stuff. And this is just a protectant for the rubber, really, more than anything else. And what I'm going to do to get underneath here, I'm just going to take a Q-tip, get it underneath here. That'll complete this step. And again, this is just to protect the rubber. Help keep it from cracking. All right. Put the tube back on our lubricant. Grab our compressor. See if we can get it without throwing the old shoe in there. I'm assuming the old pad. Yeah, I think that'll work fine. Normally I just grab the old pad, put it in here, and compress it like that, but you can do it this way too. Before you do something like this, make sure that you haven't put too much fluid in the reservoir, or this step will cause it to come out and you'll get a nasty surprise. All right, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to take our 80609 caliper grease, like the service bulletin mentioned, and we're going to grease up these two ears. These are going to rub up against that this outer shim here. All right. Now we're going to bring this guy down. Make sure we don't have the hose kinked, and we're going to sit him right like that for a moment because we're going to have to put these springs on. So the way you do this, you hold this together with one hand, find a little hole there. There's one, and here's number two. All right, and then you hold this together until you can get the caliper over here. And then that will hold it together, keep those springs from flying apart. And we're going to grab our two 14s. There's one. And there's two. And like I was mentioning when we were taking this off, this guy is a 17 millimeter, so you'll need to hold him while you torque it down to the, I believe it was 25 foot-pounds that we said earlier. Let's just check that real quick in the manual. Yeah, 25 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and get that torqued to 25. All right, guys, this is just a view of the passenger side. We're all buttoned up here. We've gone ahead and replaced our cracked bleeder screw cap cover. You can take a peek in here to make sure that you've got the wear indicator in the right spot. You can see them right there, right? And you can also take a peek on the caliper through here. Make sure you've got your retaining springs in. There's the one on the bottom. And then if we shine a light there, there's the one on the top. So we just got to put the wheel on and clean up under here. Let's go ahead and finish up on the driver's side. All right, 25. And we'll go ahead and grab 25 down here as well. All right, and that is it, guys. She is done. Now we can get the wheel put back on, and this job will be finished. We got a few more pieces to do on the passenger side, but let me go ahead and tell you, if you got any questions about this job or comments, go ahead and leave them below. I'll try to help. The idea here was to show you how to do the by-the-book Toyota way with all genuine OEM Toyota parts. One of the last things I'm noticing that we need to do here while I do this outro is I see that we did not remember to swap out our dust boot over here. So we'll go ahead and pull this cracking one off. 10 on here. But anyway, like I was saying, if you got any questions, go ahead and leave them below. I'll try to help. If you found this video useful, it taught you how to do this job, Saved you some money doing it yourself, getting things back to factory original. Appreciate you paying it forward and hitting that like button. And as always, thanks for watching.